And we're back. We're live. I don't recognize the place. It's been a while since we've been here.
Hmm.
Everything seems to be where it is. How about with you?
The water is turning white, as someone once said.
The water
I'm
is turning.
confused.
The
Nah, it's from
water is turning.
it's a little catchphrase of mine, and I'll tell you what it's from. There's an old story about a flight that disappeared on a training mission, and it was 5 planes, so it was like an entire little squadron of planes.
This Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, it's sort of the
Yeah,
origin of
yeah.
that myth. And of course, Unsolved Mysteries covered it once, and I've seen that episode
Of
a few
course they did.
times, right?
Yeah.
But one of the lines, like apparently the last transmission from I believe the guy who was leading the training director who was leading it, was "The water is turning white," and then
Hmm.
that's it. Last transmission. And for some reason, that's always just like whenever something's confused or like I don't know what's going on, things are unraveling. That's just my go-to
The
catchphrase.
water
I'm the
is
only
turning
one.
white.
I'm the only one who knows what it means.
Well, it's good to be back. We wanted to do. It's been a while since we've recorded anything. I think you and I have just kept missing each other for the last month or so, but I'm excited to kind of wrap this one up. And for anybody who's joining us, we're going to be finalizing or going over Tommy Zeigler. We want to talk about what we think may have happened and review, I guess, whatever evidence it is that we have, or even circumstantial evidence.
I mean, we have quite a
Um,
bit of evidence. The access to this stuff is pretty good at this point. It's just that
yeah.
you have to do a deep dive to find it. And the problem is, well, I mean, we will just talk as we go on, but I think
Mm.
we've already alluded to the fact that the problem is that the evidence is both voluminous and not especially clarifying.
I'd say voluminous, yes. Clarifying, no. It's a but, and the thing is, a lot of the evidence is based on witness testimony that isn't necessarily reliable, and of those people that would have been the best witnesses, they're no longer alive.
Right. And yeah, it's now too long. It's been too long to really, I think, without something absolutely exonerating or exculpatory, like somebody else's confession. And even that, I don't know, would be good enough at this point because, of course, first of all, who's going to be confessing 50 years after the fact? But
Yeah,
also, um, there are, I mean, obviously it's well documented that people falsely confess to things all the time. So,
yeah,
you still have open questions. It would take not just a confession, but confirmation of same with like DNA, I think,
yeah.
that, oh, there really was somebody unaccounted for there that night.
Which Florida right now are still denying Tommy Ziegler access to further DNA testing. I think the last round of DNA testing was, well, I mean, for me it was quite telling, but it didn't quite paint a picture, and now the technology has progressed. He's really still trying to push for more DNA testing, which some would argue is pushing him in the camp of maybe he's not guilty because he's so keen to see DNA evidence.
Right. I mean, again, I know I'm looking at an article right now, trying, yeah, because it just seems to me that the story that he has told about that night, the story that the prosecution has about that night, are both so convoluted that unless you could actually identify DNA from a party not previously identified, that's
Yeah,
literally what it would take.
yeah,
Anything else, like, oh, it looks like Charlie Mays's blood is on, Eunice Ziegler's shirt.
yeah.
Okay. I mean, stuff like that. It might poke a hole in the prosecution's constructed narrative. And that's what I think is so interesting about this case. I sometimes think about teaching like a case like this in an English literature class. I think it would have to be more of a composition class. But, the idea of how it might even be really more interesting in a history class to
Hmm.
talk about how is what we know. In other words, like how are, what is a trial, right? It
Yeah.
is a set of competing narratives built from the same set of facts. And I wonder in the whole history of trials, looking back, where you don't have a confession, where somebody hasn't plainly stated this is what happened, this is what I did, and then you have like physical evidence to basically, back up that the narrative presented by the prosecution when someone is convicted, or the narrative presented by the defense when someone is, acquitted, how often any of those narratives, either one, in the same trial actually matched the reality. My wife once had I think I might have mentioned this on this before. My ex-wife once had, I thought it was a rather brilliant idea for a show. Take the Law and Order formula and invert it. That is, start with the trial, hear the prosecution's narrative, hear the defense's narrative, watch the jury deliberations, get some drama out of that. And then the last sequence of the show would be a flashback, an objective, the thing you can only do on television, an objective flashback to what actually happened. And, the idea is that it would like split the difference between the two. Some things would be right on both sides. Some things would be wrong, that kind of thing.
It would be like a fly on the wall juror.
Right.
Again,
the rural juror. You ever watch 30 Rock?
Yes. It would be a fly, and that would be really interesting. I think that's why, a lot of murder mysteries were successful over years, because you have this who done it scenario. There's a British show, British detective show, true crime show called Death in Paradise, and it's a bit it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but they don't unveil the murderer till the end, and it's very Jessica Fletcher, where they gather all the bad guys together, all the players together, because that's what the police do. They get everybody that they've spoken to unveil the
everybody
killer.
Meet me in the drawing room at 6 o'clock.
That's exactly what they did, and I think that's a bit of a throwback to sort of a nostalgic.
It's Agatha Christie. Yeah.
And they would get everybody together and they would say, well, this is who I think did it. And it's always that one thing, like somebody like Columbo, Jessica Fletcher, Death in Paradise. They would see the back of a dollar bill and they'd be like, oh my God, George Washington. Why didn't I think of that?
Columbo used a different formula, but did you ever see, there's one episode of Columbo where they actually did the Agatha Christie drawing room concept. Like, I think that was the one episode where you, as the audience, don't know the murderer,
because he walked around with this watch and he's like, the Commodore's watch, and he kept like, whose watch is this? It was really dramatic. And I think I've watched every Columbo here in Britain. Columbo's on every Saturday and Sunday, and it's always running in the background when we're home.
Yeah, I haven't watched it in a while. I should start, because the thing about them is, once you know the answer, they're a little bit less,
No, you get to watch it from the perspective. You know how much of a wind-up merchant Columbo is. So like, whenever he's like, oh, I don't understand how these doors work, he's like, I'm just trying to really wind up this guy who's murdered 2 people.
Someday we should do a podcast episode. I think I've brought this up in the past, but Peter Falk, I read once, was sort of the opinion that the character, that he's always obviously referring to, oh, my wife this, my wife that. And of course, eventually ABC did a spinoff show called Mrs. Columbo.
Columbo, yeah.
Right. But Peter Falk was always of the opinion, it had never occurred to me that Mrs. Columbo did not exist. He was not married. And this was just another character, and like part of his, part of his whole shtick, his routine in trying to drive somebody crazy. It was just like, Mrs. Columbo is this completely blank slate avatar he could throw anything onto to help solve his murder.
He can always say, oh, my missus loves you. The other thing that was quite cool was they never said his first name. Now, there is an Easter egg somewhere that actually, like, if you zoom in on like a badge or something, you can see his first name. But anytime he gets asked his first name, do you know what he always says?
Mr.?
Lieutenant.
Oh, right.
Yeah, what's your first name? Lieutenant.
Yeah, Lieutenant.
But it's not to digress. We should do, I just want to share this. I know we're doing Tommy Zeigler, but if I had endless funds, and I'm patenting this. I think I can patent things just saying it over the internet.
Of course you can.
This is my what do they call it? Property. Intellectual property here. I always had a dream, because Jessica Fletcher, Murder, She Wrote, we all know that circumstantial evidence paints her to be a serial killer.
Oh yes. And
I always wanted to do like some sort of a CGI crossover where Jessica Fletcher is being investigated by Lieutenant Columbo and have them go toe to toe. So Jessica's obviously murdered somebody because she's around the 400th dead body she happens to be around. And Columbo, because she meets the Columbo sort of MO as far as who he investigates. She's very wealthy. She rolls with rich crowds. That is exactly who she is going to be, who's going to be investigating her.
Yeah. I mean, that would be the best cross. That is such a brilliant idea. Like, if you could only accomplish, obviously now you could only accomplish, although as far as I know, Angela Lansbury is still alive.
She is, actually.
Which is impressive in its own right. But, obviously with Peter Falk passed on, you'd have to do it as like a sketch on like a Saturday Night Live or something, you know what I mean? But it would be more than worth it just to do that as a bit. That's such a great idea, to be honest with you.
My,
Columbo investigates Jessica Fletcher
it's my
about that
intellectual
husband of hers that's dead, right?
I know.
That's never been
Yes.
properly investigated.
I know. It's like, so how many, every time she goes, if I was at a party and like, let's say my aunt said, oh, I invited my friend Jessica over to stay the weekend because she doesn't,
Yeah.
get hotels and she never buys her own food.
Right.
And as soon as I see Jessica Fletcher, I'm going to be like, you know what? I've got cramps. I need to get out of here because I could be one of the people who could be offed. So I need to bounce.
Yeah.
So why don't we? So not digressing. This is a very important topic that we should come back to. Maybe do some true crime reviews of film.
Like
But
and yeah, that would be. I think our audience, or to the extent we have an audience, this would be up their alley.
I think so. So Tommy Zeigler, I wanted to first. I want to frame it in two different ways from my point of view. Here's how I looked at it. One of which, if we look at him as innocent, the whole series of events or the theories, and you mentioned the theory of the prosecution, it's a bit ridiculous. And if you were to try to postulate what happened, if you were to decide you wanted to murder your wife and her family, it is the most complicated way he could have gone about doing it. And that is one of the problems with this case. It's like, well, the narrative is just batshit crazy. He's invariably not a stupid person.
Right. And up to and including having to fire a bullet into his, gut. I mean, like, what a decision, right? You know what I mean? Like, he easily, I mean, like, I know he supposedly had some medical, basic knowledge from the army or something like that, but I don't know about you. I would be super reluctant to fire a bullet into my midsection, thinking I know what I'm doing here.
It's like, it's people that murder, it's like the decision making wasn't there to begin with. If you look at any murder, if you watch true crime and somebody's like getting tired of their wife or partner and they decide, instead of maybe I could just divorce them, and they're like, well, maybe I need to get some cyanide and pour it in their soup. That seems to be a more sensible option. I don't know that people are necessarily thinking clearly when they're going down these routes. There's a lot of emotion, anger,
of course,
but
I mean, I think that the bigger thing, I mean, and I think what you're gesturing at is that it's not that, I mean, if he wanted to murder his wife for the life insurance, oldest motive in the book, okay, who knows why anyone does this, but it's usually money, right? Obviously, if he divorces her, not only does he not get the life insurance, he has to split the business. And so, whereas if he murders her, he gets to keep the whole business and gets her life insurance besides. So, I mean, there's, a million reasons there, literally, for him to, maybe want to off her if he has the notion to do that. What's still, and I think it is the best point in his defense, and in that book, Fatal Flaw by Philip Finch, who wrote such an extensive book about this, that makes really no sense at all, is he gained nothing by killing her parents as well.
I don't know that I agree with that though. She owns part of the shop and her family would be due. So same as me, if my wife dies, I don't get my whole house.
I mean, I'd have to look at the laws in Florida, but absent a will, everything goes to the spouse usually.
Well, do we know that there is a will or not?
That offhand, I don't know, but I mean, I would be astonished. Nobody leaves stuff up. You know what I mean? Especially a married woman. She's not going to leave a portion of her estate upwards to the generation above her. She would put it in trust, maybe, although she didn't have a child, so there was no future child. I mean, I would just expect that every nickel of it. I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
What was it Tommy Zeigler's shop though? Weren't her parents part of, wasn't it, I don't know if it was inherited the business to her family and Tommy, or was it Tommy, did he start the business from scratch?
That's a good question. I don't know that I know that offhand.
I mean, if we take a look, the one thing I want to do is let's take a look at his statement, because for me, his statement is I like to reverse engineer these things, because if he had any intent, the story would be him trying to tie up loose ends, really. Right. And I think because you sent me a bit of an overview, and it's a very good conglomeration of multiple things I've read, and I want to look at it from the point where he walks into the store, where the actual event happens. And what I'll do is go for it, man.
Yeah. Just we can edit this out, maybe.
We're live, but I can entertain. I can do a song and dance. If you need to step away, step away.
1 second. I apologize, everyone. I forgot.
I,
We're live.
I am going to do a song and dance. So while Dixon's gone, I think one thing I might do, just to fill some of the gaps, we're going to be doing Scott Peterson in the next couple of weeks. I wanted to have a chat about, just a quick chat about Chandler Halderson. Is it Chandler Halderson? So I might do a bit of a monologue on Chandler Halderson in the next week in between, because I had written something. Fortunately, we're back live again. But Dixon, I wanted to go over Tommy Zeigler's statement as sort of like the framework for us to sort of postulate what happened, because I can draw some conclusions from this along with the DNA evidence is sort of where I'm at. Would that be would that work for you, or do you have a different way of looking at this?
No, I think that's what when you're thinking about how these things play out in a trial setting, you have the defenses. I mean, their case is going to be built around Ziegler's statement, and it's the prosecution's job to poke holes in that. And obviously, the defense, aside from presenting a counter narrative, they're actually not obligated to do that. The other thing they want to do is poke holes in the prosecution's narrative. So I think we've done the former, right? I mean, and I think, in terms of like all the holes and problems with their narrative, I think we've covered in prior recordings. So this would be good. Let's look at what Ziegler had to say.
I'm going to go through the bit. I'm going to read it, and there's a few, and I've noted there's things that you've questioned that I've questioned as well. So the first thing he says is when they go inside the store, Ziegler's with Edward Williams, and he walks into the store. Now let's not talk about Edward Williams' story about Ziegler turning around with the gun and trying to shoot him. But when they go inside the store, Ziegler is hit hard from behind, causing him to lose his glasses. Now, right off the gate, that statement, if I just dig that statement apart, he's making a point to say he's lost his glasses and his vision isn't good in a building that's dark. To me, that seems intentional.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it certainly goes to, and what as a red flag for me throughout his statement is the vague like it seems always very strategically vague. It's specific but vague simultaneously. It's vague at the moments it needs to be specific, and specific at the moments where some vagueness might be understandable. So like,
because it's and the vagueness is weird. If you kind of envision, again, fly on the wall of this situation, there's some things that I can't really connect with reality, and he can make the argument that I was stunned or whatever, and that is an argument that can be made. But he then sees two blurs. So that was a quotation. He did say two blurs. So for me, that's him hammering the idea that I don't have my glasses. They're two blurs coming at him as he tries to get up. So he's on the floor. No mention of Edward Williams. He says he grabbed the .22 he kept in his trousers and tried to fire some shots. Now, I have a problem with that straight out of the gate. So if there's two assailants that knock him on the floor, are they then standing there watching him reach into his pocket, pull it out, take the safety off, and then aim the gun? Are they just going to be like, what's he doing? They're not just going to be sitting there letting him do that. I have a problem with that bit because he needs time to do that.
Yes.
So that was a problem for me.
I agree. I never really thought about that before, but that's a good point.
I'm just trying to envision this story. Yeah.
So go on. No, I mean, I think that you're right. That's definitely a reason to have a question.
So at least two times the gun jammed, so he gave up and threw at his assailants. He is then thrown around the store a bit until he is thrown into his own desk near the back of the store. This reminded me of something. When I was growing up, I was working at this place, and a mate of mine came over, and we copied our asses on the Xerox machine. It was hilarious. And as part of that process of copying our asses, we broke the copy machine. So what ended up happening was I had to explain.
Broke your ass.
My ass was fine, thankfully. But I had to explain. This reminded me of this because I had to explain how the glass broke. And I said, well, I came around the corner. I tripped over the door. I fell into a box and rolled over, and my elbow landed on the Xerox glass. Now, just sort of a side note to that story, 4 years later, when somebody was leaving, they said, there was a copy of your ass still in the Xerox machine that nobody told you about. So Just sort of a bit of a side note on that. So for 4 years, the place I worked had a copy of my ass, and they didn't tell me that, yeah, we found a copy of Sean's ass. Nice of them to keep me employed, though.
They didn't
So
fire you after they knew you lied? Wow.
no,
What
no.
company is this? I gotta go, I gotta go work
so
for them, you know?
but this story reminds me of, and this piece just makes me think of that because it says he is then thrown around the store a bit until he's thrown into his own desk near the back of the store. He remembers there's a 357 Magnum in the drawer of the desk, so he gets it out. To me, if I were putting a story together to get me to the desk to pull out the 357, I would tell a story just like that because again, there's two grown people who have successfully murdered uh, Mays and his in-laws and his wife, and they're having trouble successfully dispatching of Tommy. They're just chucking him around, sort of just pushing him into different pieces of furniture. To me,
Mhm,
that
mhm.
to me, the first thing I thought about was when I copied my ass and I made up a story about how I choreographed my way to breaking the Xerox machine. And that's what I thought about.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Again, that's, that unique experience of yours gave you a unique insight
Mhm.
into the yeah, I mean,
Wouldn't
but
it be
yeah, when you think
amazing?
about it, it is sort of like a weird ballet that, you know what I mean, that has him arrive at the exact spot where
W-
he has these guns. Yes.
Wouldn't it be amazing if my ass, like somebody was watching this,
Yeah.
and my ass solved a 50-year-old crime? Like this, that would be incredible.
It certainly would. It
That would be
certainly would.
incredible. Yeah. So we have. So then let's just continue because I think the 357 is interesting, and I'm curious because the details a lot better than I. I've spent hours researching this, but you've spent months. So
Yes.
he remembers there's a 357 Magnum in the drawer of the desk, so he gets it out. And
Yeah.
you commented, you had a comment about this in the dark, despite the fact that he can't and must be disoriented by all the beating, which is it's a very specific thing. He was able to go after he had the shit kicked out of him, somehow made it to the desk. He's like, I don't have my glasses. There's blurs everywhere, but let me open the desk, move the papers out of the way, get the 357 Magnum out, make sure it's loaded, undo the safety, and then try to fire the gun. It goes from being very sort of vague and blurry to doing very sort of things that like a chimpanzee couldn't do easily.
Yeah, well, that's and the thing is, like, what I have always thought about that aspect of his story is it sounds to me like a horror movie. Like he's seen a bunch of horror movies, and what happens in the horror movie? You know, like someone's running through the house, they're being chased by the killer, the ghost, whatever, and they get to a point where they've been like, assaulted some, and they're panicked, and
Mm,
but then they look at the desk, like in a dramatic moment, they look at it like, and then they have and then they start, they pull this thing out, and that's the next thing. And it just sounds like someone who's seen a lot of movies to me. Like that's
yeah.
really what it sounds like to me more than anything else.
And it again, you have to suspend two grown individuals standing there watching him go into the desk because it's not like he just went into the desk and pulled it out and started shooting. That's I don't think that's in the dark without glasses possible for him to do that. So he to me is trying to bring in this 357 Magnum, and I think I know why. So this is my theory anyway on these series of events. So he then thinks he tried firing it. I don't know, which these are really hard. This is where if you watch, and I watch some body language channels where they'll say this is sort of what I don't know if it's fading facts or if that's what they call it, but the detail starts to get fuzzy when someone's lying.
Uh-huh.
And he for such a an event where he knows detail, he clearly remembers it. It's a traumatic experience. He seems to have trouble remembering detail at weird times. He may or may not have fired a 357 Magnum, a big fuck off
Right.
gun.
Yes.
He can't
Yes.
remember how many, if any, shots he got off. Presumably, the gun was emptied. At this point, he started swinging it like a club. He is sure he connected on somebody while doing this. So I think he said that for a reason.
Hmm.
And this connects to the DNA evidence. So I would believe that he may be more innocent if he didn't have the blood evidence of is it Charlie Mays?
Yes.
Charlie Mays on his shirt in a manner that would be indicative of somebody that beat somebody to death. So he had, just as a recap, the DNA evidence that did come back, he wanted it to show that shirt didn't have the blood evidence of his wife or his father-in-law, and it actually turned out the only thing they could say about his shirt was it had the blood of Charlie Mays on it, which to me, he's like, okay, well, I need to somehow explain. It might have been Charlie. He was in there dead, so I was blindly swinging at somebody. So I'm wondering if he's trying to sort of tie that loose end up with that part of the story. I made contact with somebody. So where we go from here? I've lost my spot. Oh, here we are. So presumably the gun was emptied. Swinging it like a club. He's sure he connected to somebody. So he is then knocked back to the floor, at which point he loses the gun. Again, there's two people. How I mean, Tommy Zeigler isn't a big guy. He's kind of a slight guy. And these two guys who, again, have killed his father-in-law, who put up a fight, wife and mother-in-law, are having trouble dispatching a blinded and stunned Tommy Zeigler.
Right.
I mean, are they standing there letting him make contact? I don't understand how this choreography works.
Yeah, I mean, the fight, everything, all of his details about the fight. I mean, the fight itself is weird, as you've pointed out. But also, I mean, I don't remember like if what you're looking at, I get into the point where, one of the things that Ziegler says, he claims that there is a person, an unaccounted for person, like in any DNA evidence or anything that was at the scene, right? And he hears this person say, among other things, like Mays has been shot, or Mays has been like, something about Mays being disabled, if not dead. So we have to get rid of him, kill him. And the idea, the notion is that there's some, and he specifies that it was a white man's voice, Ziegler does.
Which is a weird part of this story. It's a very weird part of the story.
So that Ziegler is trying to claim basically that there's some sort of mastermind running around this very convoluted crime scene where all this, half-assed beating is taking place, where they can't seem to subdue a guy who they've already clocked, as you said, who's stumbling across in the dark, disoriented. They have the jump on him. They have him outnumbered, but they can't seem to get him, whatever. And furthermore, his statement seems to imply that there was initially a plan to kill Tommy Zeigler. I mean, Tommy Ziegler's own story does it, but that it's getting adjusted on the fly to frame him for what they've done instead.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that is just, I mean, that's the product of an overactive imagination. I have to think, you know what I mean? Like, who really? I mean, try to imagine this from like just taking him at his word. His point of view. What kind of plot is this? First of all, what are they trying to accomplish? Okay, they're trying to, I mean, it's obviously, some political thing in Winter Garden, Florida, right? And his, relationship to that judge. I mean, he's trying to vaguely connect, but that's another tell, right? He's trying to vaguely connect to some known facts. Like, there was a judge at his own trial who was tied into some lawsuits that he was on the other side of, that there were some political dealings in town that he, could have made enemies at, but he never names a name. He doesn't recognize any voice. He doesn't recognize any faces, but he can give you enough to give you the hint and the suggestion and the shadow of all of this, but never enough to give you. I mean, he would have been better off. That's what those people on Columbo do, by the way, right? They're too helpful. They say too much.
Yeah.
He would have been much better off coming and saying, I don't know. I walked in, I got clocked in the head. Next thing I know,
if you
whatever, I think I felt the burn of a shot and I fell down and I thought I was going to die.
Both there and Murder, She Wrote at the end, when there's, and it's always circumstantial evidence that you can say, well, that could be. And at the end, they're always like, well, he was getting in the way, so I had to shoot him. And it's like, no, you say nothing. You're a rich person with only circumstantial evidence against you. Right. It's time to just sort of shut up and say, I need to see a lawyer. And it happens every time. And this is a situation where he's doing something that every bad guy in Columbo does. And even the Mays been shot thing, to me, that's telling. It's almost like he's trying to tie up that loose ends that is part of his narrative. He shot Charlie Mays, and the coroner said that the shot didn't kill him. Right. The shot was actually post-mortem, wasn't it?
Yes, I don't know if it was post-mortem, but it's definitely not the cause of death. The cause of death was the head trauma. Which is itself weird, I have to say, even for the prosecution's case, because you have to start picturing like what happened. I mean, how could that have happened?
Well, he shot Charlie Mays. Charlie Mays didn't go down like he does in the films, and then he has to start smashing him with the butt end of the gun.
Right. Sure. And I
And
guess
his
that's where
story is like, okay, I had this traumatic thing that I remember where I beat the shit out of Charlie Mays to death after I shot him. I need to
Mhm.
somehow explain that. And that's sort of how I square that. He's like, this is him tying those bits together about how Charlie Mays died.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly the store receipts in Ziegler's pocket, and there's cash too, right? I think there's some cash shoved in his pockets.
Well, even this here, if you look on the screen, he had it's an interesting layout because he was coming back for a TV and to pick up some linoleum. So he had the
Right.
linoleum rolls with him. So it's like, you know what? I'm gonna murder everybody, I'm gonna kill his
Uh,
family, and oh yeah, don't forget the linoleum that I ordered.
yeah.
I don't know that makes sense that Charlie Mays had any sort of intent, and the evidence points to the fact that Tommy
Oh, yeah, I'd say
Zeigler was
that's a very good point. The linoleum is there, which sort of corroborates Mays' story that indeed he was, or was the story of the people who survived Mays and said,
like I
yes, he was
I
buying a
picture
TV
like
and some linoleum.
yeah, it's like I picture he's like, all right, I've murdered Tommy's family. I've shot Tommy. I shot him in the stomach. He should be dead. Let me walk out the door. Oh shit! The wife said, "Get the linoleum. Go back." And it's like, this is not how it works. It doesn't connect. And the evidence, the only physical evidence we have is somehow Charlie Mays' blood is on his shirt, and he's trying to connect maybe Charlie Mays as an actor in this, or he doesn't know at this time, actually, when he's telling the story, that Charlie Mays' DNA is on
Mhm.
his person. And that is a big connecting point. That is serious connective tissue in this case.
Yeah, I mean, you would expect that Charlie Mays would have some DNA on Ziegler, but see, the problem with this is that cuts either way, right? If the story, this is what's clever about Ziegler's story. If Charlie Mays is there to help kill him, then maybe some of Charlie Mays' DNA gets in Ziegler for that reason. Or if Ziegler is killing Charlie Mays, the DNA could still be explained. You know what I mean? Like
But he doesn't
it
say that.
invalidates.
He doesn't. I mean, he could just as easily say Charlie Mays killed my family and he came after me and I killed him. Done deal. I don't need to get Edward Williams involved.
Yeah, I mean that's the other part of this case that is like, why is it so complicated and convoluted? I mean, like, it makes you wonder: was he like going through some kind of an episode? Was he high? What like? I mean, what?
So what I
It's
wonder, because
way too much.
the Ed Williams thing is curious, because in the end, just to sort of rehash it, Ed Williams' story is he shows up to the store and the truck is parked out here, and he walks in with Tommy, and what he says is Tommy turned around and tried to shoot him, and the gun didn't go off. Which
Lucky. Yeah.
I wonder if that's him. You know, if the 357 didn't go off, maybe, and Ed Williams runs, and I wonder if his weird stories tell me that he's got some involvement in this, or he, like you, I think you even mentioned, you postulated that maybe he was a Ponzi in this, and he was lucky to that the plan didn't come to fruition.
I mean, whenever I read deeply into it, I always kind of come back to that idea, and I feel bad about it because honestly, Ed Williams, there's not a lot of direct evidence against him, and what stake did he have in any of this? So I feel bad accusing the man, but there's just something so wonky about the end game of this whole plot that makes you think. And first of all, the amount of involvement that is entails, the amount of stuff that Ed Williams was asked to do that night. Show up at my house on Christmas Eve, help me deliver furniture. I'm late, hang out while I do this. We're delivering furniture after 7 o'clock. Then I show up, and like, lo and behold, he tries to shoot me in the gun jams, which, by the way, Ziegler also claimed the guns he tried to shoot, jammed, right?
A lot of
That's one of the
jamming.
things.
A lot of
Right. Which I
jamming.
think makes me think that they, both parties knew. That's the other thing about that. Both parties knew that a gun indeed had jammed, and they both felt like they needed an explanation for that because they knew that the police, in looking at the guns, would figure that out.
Yeah.
The other piece is that when Ed Williams is arrested, he turns over a gun to the police. And that gun is the gun that was used to murder her parents. So it's hard to come up with how, like, he has a story, and he claims, like, I'm trying to remember, how does he claim he gets his hand on that gun? But the bottom line is they got the gun that murdered his parents, which was not any of the, that's the other weird part of this, right? He goes to all this trouble to attempt to get untraceable guns, even though in so doing, he buys them through people he knows, and all the police have to do is say, "Hey, did you buy any guns for Tommy Zeigler?" Like, yeah, we sure did. So like, it's like, like whatever. And then those guns aren't even the guns used to kill Perry Edwards and Eunice, and his wife, or Virginia, right? Is the wife. So you have that weirdness, and you have the weirdness that the gun that is used, which is one of Ziegler's guns all along, is handed to them by Ed Williams. So Ziegler can plausibly claim that was the one that was supposed to be in his truck, I think. And so Ziegler can plausibly claim that, hey, I never touched that gun that day. It was in my truck. I don't know what it was. And lo and behold, Ed Williams has it. That's the problem, I think. If you're
I think it's a problem for Ed Williams, but I don't know that if I was to guess, if somebody put a gun to my face and said, you need to give me your opinion on what happened and you have to give me your best guess, I would say Ed Williams was involved in something, but it wasn't a murder. It wasn't a multiple homicide. And I would guess that his involvement is damning enough that
But he was there that night. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I don't see how you could say he's involved but not involved in the murders when he's got to be tripping over bodies.
Because he wasn't there when the murders went down. The reason I don't think he was there is Felton Thomas's testimony, who actually identified him waiting out by the car as they went to and fro, and that would have been during the period that his family was murdered by whomever. So he wasn't involved in the shooting, but he was showing up late stage. I think his story about Tommy Zeigler turning to shoot him is compelling, and both sides are being kind of quiet on their connection because it indicts themselves. So they by saying I was involved in this plot, Ed Williams goes to jail for being an accessory to murder.
See, this is, I always, like, ever since I came across the Serial podcast, which I've mentioned on here a couple of times, really give that a listen, because I think honestly there's something similar going on, and it's what you just sort of alluded to. I think that and this is why I keep coming back to it. Neither Ed Williams's story nor Tommy Zeigler's story is entirely satisfying, and what they have is they both have a hallmark to me. The hallmark of each one of them trying to lay as much of the blame on the other as possible. In other words, they're both half truths and they don't quite add up. And I do think, I'm sure Ziegler is telling, I'm sure Ed Williams is telling more of the truth than Ziegler is. But I think, his story, like, I could easily see, that, I mean, what I really kind of believe is that Ziegler had the intention, like had told Ed Williams, like, oh, help me out with this. With the promise of, and I'll take care of you. And what he meant by take care of you was that at the, in classic movie style, was that he was going to double cross him.
Because keep in mind, Ed, sorry, mate.
No, that's it.
Keep in mind, though, Ed Williams was perfectly fine as somebody who was a part-time employee of Tommy Zeigler to stay quiet and get hot guns, if that's true. So if he's willing to do that without necessarily giving up the ghost to anybody else, then he's comfortable doing something nefarious with Tommy Zeigler. So that to me tells me that there's an expectation he's involved, but the part of Tommy Zeigler's story that seems to ring true, and the reason he keeps referring to guns jamming, I think the gun jammed when he tried to shoot Ed Williams. And I think that's when he's like, I need to explain this gun jamming. I needed to shoot this guy.
Right. And also he has a problem because now Ed Williams is going to escape and he knows. Like, that's what I kind of envision. Now it's a race to the police. Once Ed Williams is out of there, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. I think he did try. I think that gun did jam. And now it's like, oh shit. You know what I mean? Like, I think
because to me, it connects that whole falling all over the shop just to somehow get to a place where the 357 may or may not have been. Because I think there was even a point in the story where, according to Ed Williams, he witnesses Tommy Zeigler going into the house and coming out with a box. And I'm wondering if that would be where the 357 was. So it wasn't actually in the desk, but it was in the desk for the sake of his story.
Yeah, that would make more sense.
Because that was one piece of the story that never had any connection to anything. It was that witness testimony. I think Felton Thomas said, it was Felton Thomas said after he buggered off. And he said, he went in, he wiped down his car, got a box, or it was something along those lines before him and Ed Williams headed out to the furniture shop again.
Right. I mean, that's part of the story. I mean, there's so many pieces of it that, and like I even as I'm trying to talk about it in detail, my memory on some of this stuff, because is not as sharp at the moment. You know what I mean? Like, because I've done all this research, but there's so many details to keep track of,
Yeah.
and who does what. But I think in the main, you are articulating what I've always felt in some form or another. And I like that idea that's that desk piece, or excuse me, the box at the house that's the right. It doesn't fit with anything else.
No, it doesn't. And it's if the 357 is what misfired. And that's what he said. He fell into his desk while having no glasses and being hit on the head while these two guys are standing around going, should we do more than just push him into furniture? And then he manages to get the 357 out. It jams.
And that's the misfire. Okay.
And that's the misfire. And that was the only piece of truth. It's just everything to me. It's very difficult to put anybody else in the timeline of being able to shoot and kill his family outside of Tommy Zeigler. He's the only one because Ed Williams can't be placed at the scene. But Ed Williams does have a history, if we're believing his hot gun story, which there were hot guns, quote, hot guns that were there. There were guns that were, he bought from a friend. Ed Williams, of course, wouldn't be he's not a criminal mastermind. So yes, he went to his friends, and it's not as if Google was around at the time on how to get hot guns. So I don't know that his innocence, he's innocent, but I don't believe he necessarily knew what he was getting himself into. And I don't know if he had anything on Tommy Zeigler, if there was anything he was trying to get out of with Charlie Mays and Ed Williams. If maybe there was a backstory there that he was involved in something he shouldn't have been. Who knows?
Right. And it's the 38. Okay, that's where I misremembered which gun was which. It's the 38 that is used to kill and that was the one that is supposedly in the truck, and that
the 38, which ended up in
38. And that's the one that killed Perry, and it's also the one that ends up in Ed Williams' hands and the one he turns over.
So even that
and
to me
the one that can be traced. And I'll give the author of the book that I read does make this point that, like, why you go to all this trouble to go get these untraceable guns. First of all, you don't do that good of a job of it, but second of all, the whole point of having untraceable guns is so that you don't have to use the one that's registered in your name to like shoot anybody. And then yet that is according to the state exactly what Tommy Zeigler did.
Yeah.
Which raises the question, why would you, what is, like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you go around getting all these cheap guns, all these untraceable guns, and then turn around and for no apparent or good reason, shoot your folks with the one gun that was absolutely in your name?
Yeah.
Which that's a good question.
It's a lot of things went wrong that night. And I think I mean, even the 38 being with Ed Williams, that 38, if it shot his family,
right,
we can roughly place Ed Williams out front of that house by both Mr. Fry. What's his first name? His friend, Don Fry.
Don Fry, yeah.
Don Fry can place Ed Williams waiting by the car, and Felton Thomas can place a black guy in a car waiting as he's going back and forth to the store. Right. That 38 got from the store back to Ed Williams without the help of Ed Williams.
Oh, I see your point. Yeah. Because Ed Williams isn't there. Well, except that I think in the way that the story works, so like they're alive, right? The parents and the wife at the time that guy leaves, the guy who he swapped cars with, the employee. Yes, Curtis.
I forget his name, but yes,
Curtis Dunaway. He says he left shortly before 7. Ed Williams is seen by, Don Fick, but I don't think Don Fick claims to see him until Fick drives by the house 3 times.
Don Fick mentions there's somebody waiting in a car, doesn't he?
Yes, he does, but it's not till about 8 o'clock or 8:15. You know what I mean? It's like later in the evening. And Felton Thomas also later. So there's like there's an unaccounted for hour between 7 and 8.
So hypothetically, Ed Williams could have been there before Felton Thomas and
that he could have met Ziegler at the furniture store to begin with, or Ziegler could have gone and picked him up, brought him to the furniture store, committed these murders, and that would explain how Ed Williams had the gun at all. Like, how does he have that 38?
Well,
because in his story, he's walking into the, Ed Williams' statement is, I'm walking in, he tries to shoot me, I turn around and leave. When does he get the gun?
So does he have the gun in his car? Is he given the gun in his testimony?
Or he might he might claim that that's the gun that jammed. The 38 is the gun that Ziegler attempted to shoot him with and that jammed. And that's right. That's the story. Because Williams says that then Ziegler was like, oh, but that means Ed Williams is claiming that the 38 is the gun that jammed. Ziegler is claiming that the 357 jammed. There's a lot of jammed guns around here. You know what I mean?
The crime scene, isn't the 38 on the floor there?
No. Ed Williams turns that
38
gun.
caliber, or is that what they were shot with?
That could be one of the Chinese guns. The 38 I'm talking about is the 38 that was the one that Tommy Zeigler was owned and was registered in his name. He claimed he kept in his truck, wasn't sure what happened to it. That gun is the gun that murdered his mother-in-law and his father-in-law. And that gun is turned over directly to police by Ed Williams. Ed Williams claims that when he went to enter the furniture store, Ziegler turned around and pointed that gun at him to shoot him, and it misfires. And then Ziegler, of course, he's like, oh, shit, I'm getting out of here. Someone tries to shoot you, that's going to be your reaction.
Yeah.
And Ziegler tries to calm him down and appease him by saying, oh, it's just a joke or something. And here, you can have the gun. See, like I was only screwing around with you. And that's how he gets the gun. But that's a shaky story, I think. Like that would be like, imagine that you were in that. Let's imagine like for a second that it's true. I'm Tommy Zeigler. And I think that this part of the plot probably is true to some extent. Yeah. That there was an attempt by Ziegler to shoot Ed Williams. Like, as I said, I think that happened. And how it went down exactly, is anybody's guess. Maybe it even did. But I can't imagine Ziegler, because the point of that story is like, oh, now Ziegler tries to hand me the gun and tell me he's joking, is to make it sound like, he had no knowledge of what was going on. Right. Whereas if he's like, oh, crap, like, I knew Ziegler was a homicidal maniac because I was there when he shot three other people. Yeah. And so I get into a fight with him and I stole the gun from him and I ran over here. I mean, he could have maybe said that, like I wrestled the gun from him. But, for whatever reason, that's not the story he cooked up.
He's taken back by that. And the one thing that I had noted earlier, I forgot to mention, is I wonder what the what his insurance on the store says about breaking and entering and people being murdered on site, or
right,
I wonder if there's some sort of a payout for that sort of thing. And if Ed Williams was involved in getting guns for an eventual murder, that is a loose end that he does need to tie up.
The other piece, as I'm thinking this through, is that I'm actually now thinking maybe Ed Williams' story has a little bit more credence than I thought, because if you're Tommy Zeigler, why would you do that? Why would you, let's just assume his Ed Williams story is true for a minute. You've attempted to shoot Ed Williams. It didn't work because the gun jammed. And so now why would you give him the gun? Well, if you can't shoot him,
you can put his fingerprints on it, I guess.
Correct, right? You could give him the gun so that and not only put his fingerprints on it, make sure it's in his possession. So when anybody when you tell your story about how your mother-in-law and father-in-law were killed by unknown assailants, and they find the only problem with all of that is that it is indeed no matter what, he's going to have to explain. But I guess maybe the explanation would be it's his gun that Ed Williams says, but he's going to say, well, Ed Williams worked for me and must have taken it. I guess. I mean, if you're going to.
The only other thing I want to connect to that is the weird part in his story about the white man says Mays is dead. And one, he sees without his glasses and in a shop that's too dark to see shit. He knows it's a white dude. And I don't know, maybe it's
he's going by the voice. I mean, he says that it's a white man's voice.
He doesn't sound like a black guy at the time.
Well, Charlie Mays is dead. Kill him.
That's right. Because this is Florida, so it's close enough.
Right, yeah.
Well, we got Mays.
This is Central Florida before Disney World. Everybody talks like it's Alabama.
But I wonder if that story is like to maybe cover his ass. He's like, well, I don't know why Ed thought I shot him. There was a white guy that was there, so maybe
Right.
to Ed Williams, all white guys look alike.
But like that actually even sounds like, as I'm sitting here through it. The other thing is that again, I keep coming. It's the vagueness, and maybe these way, like he knows that Ed Williams. Like if you think that Tommy Zeigler did this all on his own, Ed Williams wasn't even involved. Maybe he had a little bit of conscience and didn't want to say enough to just say directly, "Oh no, Ed Williams shut." Like because he could have said, "I heard Ed Williams say," you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and Ed Williams is the one with the gun. That would have been a lot easier.
Yeah.
Of course, Ed Williams is going to have a different story, but
all that went to shit when he couldn't shoot Ed Williams,
right,
and pretty much control that narrative completely. And I think Felton
right.
Thomas was an accident, and that really scuppered things a bit for him as well.
Sure.
And I think by that point, Felton Thomas showing up, the gun misfiring on Ed Williams, he was already pot committed because he had already killed his family. So he needed to go through with something, and he was thinking on his feet. And I keep going back to that story that I read, and I didn't do a good job of referencing it, and I'm not prepared today. There was that clip. If you go into the Tommy Zeigler, and I think it's almost like a Tommy Zeigler innocent website, it references Felton Thomas saying when he met Tommy Zeigler, he had thrown up outside of the car, and police were taking evidence of the sputum. I don't know if that's the right professional term, to link that back to Tommy, and that would have been right after he would have gotten into that fight with and murdered his family and Charlie Mays. Which is a telling thing. It's Christmas Eve. He was looking for bourbon a second ago. Now he's throwing up from stress. I don't know.
Maybe he drank the bourbon. No, he never got
it. But it's I think it's an interesting case, and I think the for me, and it sounds like for you, it's difficult to assume anything other than Ed Williams and Tommy Zeigler are the only people that could be burdened with any crime in this matter. That I don't see any chance that there's an outside actor.
No, and as I said, I don't think I finished the point. The reason why I think of that because in the Serial podcast, it's a very similar situation where you have, the crime isn't as extensive, but it boils down to the person who's convicted is convicted because of the testimony of one person. Now, the problem is that one person's story doesn't, first of all, he can't tell it the same way twice. And second of all, it often doesn't make 100% sense, which leads you to believe that probably he always knew more about what was going on than he admitted. Yeah. But at the end of the day, he had enough of the truth, and clearly the motive for the crime belonged to Adnan Syed in that case, not to this guy who might have helped him out to some degree. I think you have a similar situation here. Ed Williams would only profit by the murder of all these people if Tommy Zeigler, unless it was just a plain robbery, but it seems clear that it wasn't, because the furniture store, you know what I mean? Like, it would have to be like a robbery of of like cash or whatever. Like the gain, the clearer game is going to be for Ziegler. And so maybe he involved Ed Williams to a degree that Ed Williams, more than Ed Williams cared to admit, and that Ed Williams was involved more than he wanted to say. And so that accounts for some of the wonkiness of the story. Meanwhile, Tommy Zeigler, his story, if he admits too much about Ed Williams's involvement, he has by necessity to implicate himself.
He's implicating himself. Yeah.
So therefore, he keeps it purposely vague. It seems like a very similar pattern. The only thing is, in this case, I could go back and forth on Ed Williams, and I honestly feel guilty even suggesting, in some senses that maybe he was more involved because, it's easy enough. There's a lot of weirdness, but there's certainly a version of events wherein he is purely a victim who was very nearly murdered that night, and that Ziegler would have been more than content to try to frame him for, and Florida in 1972, 70, 75, whatever. I mean, he would have most certainly, if Ed Williams had been on trial, there never would have been a life sentence then, ticked up by the judge to death. The jury just would have given him death. That would have been that,
I don't, and I agree with you, and I don't think I think it's a stretch with what we know to assume that Ed Williams was involved in the shootings, because murders like that are always almost always, I'd say more than 90% of the time, I don't know what the stats are, it's somebody that's close to the people that are murdered.
Oh yeah.
Ed Williams isn't close to those people. Ed Williams maybe had some sort of a financial gain in this, but I don't believe he is a murderer or somebody who would go into a murder. I think he thought there was some sort of maybe robbery plot or something like that.
Right. Well, I think people who are really in the Ed Williams did it, Tommy Zeigler is innocent camp tend to run it the other way, where they say that Ed Williams was conspiring with Charlie Mays because they knew each other to rob the furniture store that night, and maybe Felton Thomas, and that Felton Thomas got cold feet or whatever.
You got to
And
do a
that
lot of
things went
gymnastics to get
Yeah,
there. You got
I
to do
think
a
so.
lot of
I
gymnastics.
think
Whereas
so.
if you know, kind of going back to Occam's razor, which doesn't really help answer this question, answer this in any way. But if you look at the story of Edward Williams and him going to police, and Tommy Zeigler not going directly to police, going to his mate, who was a cop, to be fair. Tommy Zeigler's story just does not look like the story of somebody who was attacked. It's like when you start saying hit on the back of the head, and he went through this series of stumbling around like some Keystone Cops thing, and firing these guns and throwing them at people, and I think I hit somebody, but then I saw and heard a white guy, and then I was able to quickly and dexterously grab a
Yeah.
357 Magnum
Yeah.
and shoot it with two guys over. It's like, whoa, buddy, whoa. This is what people who do interrogations would say. There's a lot of if he was saying it, fading facts, meaning he was sort of mumbling his way out of these sort of half-assed truths to
Yeah.
explain it. And
Yeah.
that to me is almost an indictment of his involvement. It's his inability to tell a clear story as to what happened. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I also, the thought that came flashing in and out of my head. What was I going to say here? Well, it'll come back to me if it's important. But I agree that Ziegler's story does not really tell the story of somebody who was the victim that night the way you would expect. And that was it. I mean, like, really, we've spent almost as much time talking and thinking about this case as the police did in investigating it and then reaching the conclusion very quickly, which was really quick.
Yeah.
They arrested him. I think he's still in the hospital when they arrested him. So they didn't buy almost any of it immediately. And Don Fick did the right thing, to his credit. He stepped aside, because that's the other thing that always, that Ziegler's call was to that party and not, okay, he could say, well, I knew Don Fick was there. But first of all, if I'm shot, I think I call an ambulance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Great point. It's like, let me think. I've just been, my family's dead. Good old Don. He's at a party. He'll come. It's my family's dead. Don, are you busy? What's going on?
Yeah.
Family shot. You think you can? I know you're at a part. Of course. No, Don Fick. It's an interesting one, because you made a good point at this time. I don't know even if 911 was a thing. But if I'm in that position, the last thing I'm thinking is calling my mate Don. I'm thinking I'm calling the fastest first responder, not the guy who's at a party that I may or may not reach.
Part of the people who think that Ziegler, I know one of the things I read is the people who think Ziegler did it, that he strategically picked December the 24th because he knew not only that Fick would be off and he might have direct access to him, but also that it being Christmas Eve, there was going to be more of a skeletal kind of situation with the police that night.
Interesting.
So that he was aware enough of stuff that this was and so it may be, the answer to why Perry and Virginia Edwards, the answer might be that they were victims of circumstance, rather than, like, he wouldn't necessarily be targeting them, but he wanted to do it that night to, increase his chances of being able to control the narrative in the situation.
Yeah.
And that they were there was just collateral damage to that end. But having said that, I mean, it is, I guess, the hard part, and it is like, you have two things that don't quite jive, which is, if Ziegler is the person behind this is a plot that evolved over several months. He bought the life insurance on you. I think it was like additional life insurance in like October or November. Yeah. He's getting the guns back over the summer. He's putting things, even then, like in the days leading up. I mean, Charlie Mays like contracts to buy the TV and that like 2 or 3 days before. I mean, it's everything seems so coordinated and planned. And then the night of, like, it seems so chaotic. Like it
Yeah.
seems like all kinds of terrible, obvious mistakes. You
You mean
know, like
almost
the
like a
using
guy
your
who
own. Yeah,
almost like a guy who owns a furniture store tried to commit some sort of a complex criminal mastermind type crime.
yeah, I suppose so.
It
He
is
thinks he's smarter than the average bear, and he just isn't.
it's we're not going to solve this. I mean, my
No.
ass may have solved it, but outside of that, we're not going to
Well,
solve
let me
this
ask you. Well, this
collectively.
is where we should end. Do you think he is where he belongs? Not necessarily on death row. I mean, he's sitting on death row, but it's very clear there's no intent to ever actually execute him. So let's assume that that's a life in prison sentence, even though
Hmm.
it's technically it's a death row sentence. Do you think that he, on balance, if you're on the jury, that's really the question. If you're on the
Hmm.
jury presented with all this, what's your vote?
That's a tricky one. I think he is. I would vote guilty given what I've seen. Not for and same as the jury, I would have been like, yeah, I don't want death row. I don't want this on my conscience because I'm not sure to what degree, but he had means motive to a degree and opportunity. However, if a jury outside of my view had let him off, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing I kept trying to arrive at as I wrote and thought about this case for quite a while, as you said, is where would I really land? Because there is a lot of factors, and there are things that pull in that like, yeah, but direction. But at the end of the day, it's his statement that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, no, I'm trying to, I don't think he,
The Bourbon statement too. He is missing time in that.
but are they, he didn't testify to those at trial, if I recall correctly. I think that
He's got
was,
smart lawyers.
yeah. Um, but I'd have to read the trial transcript, I suppose, to know like what I would have done in the moment. But
Man, I couldn't find that.
with the because then you know what was and was not presented for sure, and how and in
Yeah.
what order and all that. But with what I know in front of me, I think I would definitely, yes, I would certainly not. Of course, I'm anti-death penalty anyway, but I don't think I would vote for something very final. But I'm comfortable with him being in prison. I do believe he is where he
Yeah.
belongs.
Well, I think we've done as best as we can with Tommy Zeigler. For anybody who listened to my little sort of middle road, we're going to be coming back to not wrap up. We never started Scott Peterson. We had a bit of a fun one with Scott Peterson, quote, fun one, where we went over the calls between him and his mistress that were recorded. And I think we're going to do a proper job on a similar one-off episode, really just seeing if we think he's guilty, looking at the evidence, looking at the timeline. So if you're interested in that, please tune in. We'll probably have that over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, thanks for joining me today there, Mr. Dixon.
Absolutely. Very good. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I had to blink out there for a minute because for the benefit of our listening audience, I know all of you out there are just with bated breath saying, what is he doing in the middle of a
Yeah.
live broadcast? My mom, one of the things that's been, I think, causing us not to be able to record quite as often is my mother fell and broke her hip a while back. And she's moving back to her house, but that's just added some complications to my life. And one of the things that's happening is that there are some installations being made today. So hopefully she's on the mend and on her way back to being able to live in her own space, which will be nice.
Well, I'm off tonight to. I have a friend who's visiting from the States, although he lives here. He's a cop too, so it'd be interesting to talk about some of these things with him.
Oh yeah, we should have him on as a special guest star sometime.
I will. He's a new cop, an American from New Mexico, who's a British or London cop.
Wow, how
so
do
he
you? I
lives
mean,
in
I would
London.
think like they allow immigrants to be hired as bobbies, eh?
I know, and from New Mexico too. He's 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 coming over tonight, and I think my weekend's going to entail not trying to eat and drink. I've lost 20 pounds since January, and I'm trying to get myself to a healthy weight whilst I'm still young enough to do it. So that is my situation. So hopefully I'll have a good weekend. I've been behaving myself for a long time. Just want to
All
have a
right.
good solid 6 months and then call it good on the diet front.
There you go. All right.
All right. Well,
Good
listen.
luck tonight.
Sorry.
I said good luck tonight.
I will. Well, listen, thank you everybody for tuning in. If you've listened to us bullshit even to this point and you haven't subscribed, you are doing yourself a disservice because there's really no excuse at this stage for you listening. However, if you subscribe, then you're a subscriber and that makes sense as to why you're listening. And you have plenty of excuses why you're still listening to us bullshit at this stage. All right. To everybody, have a good week. Dixon, it was good speaking to you and
Nice
have
to
a good
speak to
one.
you. Thanks. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye. And we're